Yeah. I got my snow isle hats, flag.
All right. Nice.
Some reason. That was a really good. Almost too much mask, right? They wanted my slides, like, you know.
What are they thinking?
In advance.
What are they thinking?
But they also wanted like the bottom border to be free or like captions.
Oh,
So I had to adjust all of my slides.
that's also quite the constraint.
Yeah.
Wow. Most systems put them below
Mhm.
without having to take up the screen space. So I'm gonna rush through things. I can't get it down past 8 minutes, so.
I haven't even timed myself. So.
Okay, well, it was all that intro stuff and I feel like some of it's just gotta be there. You know?
Yeah.
Anyway, it'll be fun.
Yeah.
And I think we have a great.
Crazy busy? Yeah. Yeah. Same as you.
Testing.
And it's. I know.
I've already gone. I went and left a whole long time ago.
So that's always nice.
Yeah. Yeah, I could, pull them up.
Yeah. You get ordered.
ARSL proposal was accepted.
Dina. Like, you guys are welcome to come and stay with me. Then he said she would. You are welcome.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm still
can't
trying to
stay.
figure out.
I'm gonna keep y'all down there.
Hold
off just a second.
Thanks. That ATOM and JCLC, like, bam, right after each other.
No, I know.
Are you ready?
Oh, that's hilarious. That's hilarious. So someday we need to talk about.
Seriously, I would love to do that. Are y'all ready? Oh, yeah. Hi. Do they look ready?
Yes, they're ready. Look at them. Look at the pictures.
Okay. That's right. Okay. And Aiden, is that good to go? Okay. Oh, thank you. Okay.
That's the album cover. Where you are.
Yeah. Great. Oh, yeah, I can keep running that. All right. Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to day 2 of Cheryl. Meet you yesterday. I'm the forum facilitator. It's so good to see so many of you back today. We're really excited. I'm so glad to see so many of you here. I have just a couple of quick announcements before I introduce Liz Bedford, one of our local hosts, who's going to introduce our panelists for us. Don't forget to sign Nancy's retirement kudos board, the QR code for which, I know that face exactly, right? The QR code for which is on your table tents. So please do that and show your love for Nancy, because dang, she deserves it. So remember that there's conversations happening on the Discord, and the QR code for that is also available on your table tent. And dine arounds this evening. If anyone needs to waste some good time with good company after the conference and before you have to jet off, please also sign up to informally host or just attend a dine around event this evening. We also want to make sure that you take that we have available from the registration table, because we don't want to take any of that home with us. I don't know that it's going to fit in my luggage. So you're really going to help me out. Take more stickers and bags. And if there's a couple of COVID tests left still that we need to use up and finish up, so please feel free to take them with you. All of the squeezy orcas and buses that Beth from UW Press brought over, and the bags that she has. And don't forget to take your Library Publishing Forum flyer. They're in those tubes in the boxes, the cardboard tubes, so they're ready for travel. So please make sure you grab one of those. Look how beautiful they are. Maggie Rosenau, our communications specialist, designed those. They're just so gorgeous. So please make sure to grab one of those. And then the last announcement that I have is, I know we're live streaming, but don't tell Melanie and Nancy that we're doing this. But we're going to do a special little thing during our therapy dog session today, since if you weren't here yesterday, the therapy dogs weren't able to make it. They had doggy emergencies, family emergencies. But we're going to replace that with a little share in the PC community. Please do come to the Mural Lounge at 1:30. I think it's 1:30 to 2:30 today. Somebody will correct me if that's wrong. And we'll have a fun thing for you to do. That's a surprise. So now I'm going to turn the events over to Liz Bedford. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Liz Bedford. I am your session host and also a member of the program committee, and I'm so pleased to be here with you all. First, a couple quick reminders that this event is covered by LPC's Code of Conduct, which is linked on the website and in the program. And please do isolate if you're feeling sick. There are masks and rapid tests available at the check-in desk, and our full COVID policy is on the LPC blog. So, we all know that the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion are under attack, and the program committee really wanted to use this plenary as an opportunity to underscore that despite these ongoing threats and challenges, this work is still happening, and it's critical for us as a publishing community to understand the needs of researchers who are doing it and the communities they're working with, and also to understand and think critically about how our own policies and practices support or hinder these values. So today we have 3 short talks, and then there'll be an opportunity for questions and conversation. Our first speaker will be Melanie Walsh, who is an assistant professor in the Information School and an adjunct professor in the English department at the University of Washington. She is an executive council member for the new Center for Advances in Libraries, Archives, and Museums, or CALMA. Our second speakers are Sandy Littletree, who is an assistant professor in the UW School, and Carol Palmer, who is a professor in the same department. They are co-PIs of the project Data Services for Indigenous Scholarship and Sovereignty. Sandy is also a PI of Scaling Community Through Archives, a national program to expand community archives, while Carol is also a leader of the LIS Forward initiative. And then finally, Tracy D. Hall was named Executive Director of the Historically Black Colleges and Universities, or HBCU, Library Alliance in January 2026. Prior to assuming this role, she was appointed Distinguished Practitioner in Residence and Professor in Practice at the UW School, where she continues to teach. So I will hand it over to Melanie.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's really wonderful to be among this community. Such a beautiful day as well. So today I want to share a little bit about my research at the intersection of books and data, drawing out how data both shapes and can reveal who and what gets published, especially with regard to diversity. So last year, with several collaborators, including 2 of my former MLIS students who are in my data science class, I published a study on how automated collection diversity audits were being used in public libraries. So for those who might be unfamiliar, a diversity audit is basically a systematic review of a library's collection that evaluates and measures how many books are diverse by some kind of metric. What counts as diverse? That is a great question. That was one of our motivating questions. So according to a survey by Library Journal in 2022, 46% of libraries had conducted a diversity audit, and that was up from just 9% 2 years earlier. I don't believe they've published another study, but diversity audits have been increasing at libraries nationwide. So why are so many libraries doing these diversity audits? Well, in the last several years, there's been a growing awareness. There was always an awareness, but there's growing awareness and data of the systemic inequities in the book business. So for example, according to a study by Richard So, mainstream publishing has been extremely white over the last 70 years. Between 1950 and 2018, over 95% of the most widely held titles published by mainstream publishers were authored by white writers. And of course, as you all know, libraries usually or primarily publish their books. They rely on stream publishing. As Frank Brazel from the Seattle Public Library told me, we don't create content, we buy content. And obviously that is one of the big interventions and opportunities here that we are gathered to discuss. But this means that most library collections are similarly skewed along the lines of the mainstream publishing industry, and diversity audits aim to assess and address these gaps. So while manual audits date back almost a decade, the practice accelerated in 2021 when commercial vendors like Baker and Taylor, Ingram, introduced large-scale audit tools powered by proprietary metadata and automated classification. So we're manually auditing just the children's section of a library might take months. These tools promise to audit entire collections in weeks or days. The companies also provide shopping lists and recommended books to fill these diversity gaps, which are typically books sold by the same vendor performing the audit. So some of the things we wanted to know were how prevalent are automated collection diversity audits in US public libraries and who provides them at what cost? How do these audits actually work and what counts as a diverse book? Do library workers find these audits nuanced, trustworthy, and useful? And more broadly, what happens when sensitive, value-driven cultural work is partly outsourced to automated systems developed by commercial vendors? Can these tools meaningfully support the values they claim to advance? So to answer these questions, we took several approaches. We interviewed 14 staff members from public libraries across the US. We conducted a survey to evaluate librarians' experiences with and perspectives on diversity audits with a focus on public libraries. We obtained public library purchasing records from a platform called GovSpend, which tracks government procurement for over 8.8 million entities, including many public libraries. And we also reviewed vendor documentation, and we conducted informal background interviews with many staff members from these vendors. So what did we find? I'm not going to have time to go through all of our findings. So if you're interested, you can look up our paper, or we could talk about it in the Q&A. But I'll kind of hit you with some of the highlights. So vendors operationalize diverse books by first dividing into standardized categories. Specific diversity categories vary slightly by vendor, but they all structure and exhibit a degree of incongruity. So vendors combine demographic markers like Black and Asian interest, thematic social issues like substance abuse and addictions, and umbrella terms like multicultural, resulting in an expansive but loosely organized schema. They then classify books by automatically matching on a combination of subject headings and proprietary data sources, such as title lists curated by the staff. And they produce reports with data visualizations that break down results in different categories. This is an example of what Ingram's report might look like, and it is telling you how many inclusive or diverse items you have compared to some kind of average, and then they break down these results in these different categories that I've described. So vendors often claim their audits are context sensitive and designed to avoid reinforcing stereotypes, yet it remains difficult to assess how such contextual sensitivity is applied at scale. For example, Sherry Markson's What Really Happened in a journalistic account of COVID-19's origins was tagged as Asian interest in one vendor report that we saw. Markson is a Jewish Australian journalist, and while the terms Asian and China appear in the BISAC headings, this book is pretty different from the kinds of titles libraries often seek when trying to increase racial representation or reflect community demographics. So the libraries we spoke and those we surveyed expressed some frustration with the overly broad and opaque nature of these diversity categories. 41% said they were not to or not at all effective at being responsive to local community needs. And some librarians perceived them as reductive or even counterproductive. So one person told us to bundle indigenous materials as a single concept is akin to bundling European as a concept, inadequate and superficial. There were also some other critiques about transparency and potential conflict of interest in terms of purchasing books from the same vendors. But despite these critiques, many participants emphasized the convenience, time savings, and utility of these tools. So 90% said they were somewhat delivering quick, scalable results. 82% said they were effective at producing evidence to communicate with stakeholders, which was very important to many of the people we spoke with. So 9 interviewees similarly mentioned time saved and convenience. And one person said there's no way we would have time to manually go through even a portion of our collection. Participants also found that these comparative benchmarks comparing to average libraries were useful for demonstrating to critics, basically potential book banners and book challengers, that their collections were not abnormally imbalanced, which was something that surprised us. One motivation of the audit, someone told us, was to prove we're not that crazy. We're not that different than other libraries. It's not like we're just offering wildly crazy books that no one else is offering. So overall, we found that some form of computational assistance may be necessary to assess the inclusivity of large collections. Automated vendor-led audits offer a convenient but homogenizing solution. that risks flattening the complexities of identity into standardized categories and potentially deepens libraries' infrastructural dependence on opaque commercial systems. But of course, these aren't problems that originate with libraries. They largely originate with the publishing industry. So I just want to circle back to think a little bit about how data is not only something that can reveal some of these trends, but is also actively shaping some of these trends that we're seeing. So in 2022, I published an essay about sales data, book sales data, and how that data is being used in the publishing industry. This is data that is collected by a company called BookScan that has totally transformed the way the publishing industry works in the last 25 years. I spoke with editors and publishers who told me that sales data now basically makes and breaks authors' careers. It largely determines whether a certain book gets acquired or rejected, even if an editor disagrees with what the numbers are showing. The sociologist Clayton Childress has some amazing work on this as well. He talked to one editor who said that bad book sales numbers can haunt. They're like a bad credit score. If an author hasn't published a book before, then it's compared to comparative titles or comp titles. And recent research has also shown that comp titles are. The scholar Laura McGrath has some great work on this. And so this is yet again perpetuating this cycle and these biases. And the last thing I'll note, and this is a big concern of mine, this data is also very inaccessible. It's only accessible to people who work in the publishing industry, and it cannot be used for research purposes. They actually changed their policy about this in the last several years, so there's very little oversight about how this influential data is shaping who and what gets published. And finally, I just wanted to kind of gesture broadly to think about some of these same patterns and trends in terms of academic publishing. So sales data does not shape academic publishing. Notoriously, academic books sell very few copies. I'm actually working on an academic book right now. Maybe we'll sell more, probably not. I do think it's useful to think about similar principles about how data or incentive structures is dictating how people want to publish. So, for example, such as citations and prestige. And as many of you know, a lot of prestigious journals or publishers do not, for example, publish open access. So, just reflecting when I'm thinking about where I research, unfortunately, I am often thinking about tenure and promotion committees and how these things are going to be perceived, and that's really shaping my decisions about where I publish. So I think it's useful just to think about these, systemic ways that data is shaping this system. So in sum, I hope this research can be food for thought and maybe potential inspiration for this community. Data has shown that there's a real need for more diverse books in libraries, and that need is not being fulfilled by the traditional Big Five publishing industry. My research suggests that data and automated tools, if used thoughtfully and responsibly, can potentially be a helpful aid in evaluating collections for diversity, though other methods should definitely be used too. And I hope these remarks also raise questions about the different kinds of data and incentive structures that shape publishing, potentially offering lessons about what not to replicate in alternative models of publishing, as well as what realities authors face in choosing how to publish. Thank you for listening to me.
Well, I'm going to jump right in the interest of time, but I can't help but say how delighted I am to really be here and that you invited us with our good friends who we don't get to spend nearly enough time with. So Sandy and I are going to split our time here at the podium to talk about rethinking data stewardship through Indigenous priorities. This is drawing from a project, the DESIS project. DESIS stands for Data Services for Indigenous Scholarship and Sovereignty. And the aim of our work is to support libraries and repositories in stewarding Indigenous research data with applying the CARE principles. How many of you have heard of the CARE principles? Yeah, they really have. It's been remarkable to see a set of principles really get so much recognition and uptake very quickly. Exciting, but also has left our institution sort of looking for guidance and trying to figure out how do you take these very broad principles, interpret them, and put them into practice. So that's where our work comes in. And just to give you sort of an review of the schematic of our team, we're very fortunate to be funded by the Mellon Foundation and have been able to assemble a great collaborative group. And as a settler scholar, I really see my role as facilitating and finding a pathway to progress. So that really starts with our incredible expertise in the Information School in Native North American Indigenous knowledge. And so then partnering that with the work we do on data curation, our collaborators that we've had for a long time in the qualitative data repository, then bringing in scholars of Indigenous language and culture, and also experts, Indigenous data archives. We've had lots of iSchool contributors, students, also CALMA folks, including Brandon, who's here, and library contributors in our first phase, including Jenny Muhlenberg and Ann Jenner at UW. So this team altogether is taking up two different tracks of work, and I'm going to talk about the first one, and Sandy will cover the second one. The first one is about really more aligned with research data services. How do we serve current scholars who are producing Indigenous data? And then Sandy will talk about how do we help implement care in our institutions that already have Indigenous collections. So track one, as we call it, is about data produced by active scholars. We have a number of strategies that we're using to sort of move forward and make progress. We start with data case studies, working very closely with the scholars. And this is really to not only understand the array of data that they're producing, but also really deeply understanding the Indigenous research methods so that can be integrated into the curation process. We then take certain core cases and move them into a collaborative curation segment along with our partners at the Qualitative Data Repository. This has been essential for helping us really achieve our goals of aligning with Indigenous data sovereignty. And then we're moving to really help with that practical application. We're moving collections into a QDR testbed to be able to demonstrate and show what it can really look like. And then we'll be translating what we're learning into guidelines for research data professionals. But just to give you a little more context, I want to share a little bit about one of our core cases. It's the data behind a book published by Christopher Touton, who's one of our co-PIs and a faculty member in American Indian Studies here at UW. The book was published by UW Press, and it's Cherokee Earth Dwellers, Stories and Teachings, the Natural World. And it was developed, Chris developed it with Hastings Shade, an elder in the Cherokee Nation, esteemed elder that he worked with for decades. When Hastings died, he worked with Loretta, his wife, and now we're working with the son, Larry Shade, that they're both deceased. But there's behind that book, and then there's also a fabulous e-publication that came out, and that's on the Raven Space Indigenous digital publishing platform. So I recommend checking that out. But just for the book alone, there's 460 different files of all sorts of Indigenous knowledge. A lot of it's stories and teaching. Some of it's the original pamphlets that reproductions of what Hastings put together, a really wide array of materials. So I want to just really highlight what we feel like we're really making progress on at this point is what we call upholding contextual and relational integrity. And we're really doing that through metadata, as you probably would guess, right? So at the study level, we've innovating a bit with what we're calling significance statements, which we borrowed from the Australian museum community. At the final level, we're implementing relational provenance fields, and then we were working towards an application profile that really try to apply some of the various standards and recommendations that are coming out from the Indigenous data sovereignty groups. So I want to close up my part just by some takeaways at you. So maybe some of these will be good for discussion. But in research data services and even in the Library Publishing Coalition values statement, we like to say as open as possible. So I think from the perspective we're learning about and really developing with thesis, we want to more put at the forefront to be as accountable as possible. And so for me, that means always bringing that collective benefit idea, which is the C of the CARE principles, to the forefront, making sure it's driving our priorities and our planning of how we carry things out. And when we do this with the communities and the scholars, preservation is always at the top of what they're caring about. Language revitalization is huge. And a lot of what we can do can be through this representation and metadata and the collaborative processes. There's also a whole lot of things we can't assume that we might think we've learned already. Tribal authority as the base of control. Not the case in several of our cases. The family, in the one case I shared, the other one, it's going to be an advisory board, so you can't default to the tribe. Privacy protections as a priority. With qualitative data, the first thing that curators look at is de-identification. Have you protected the privacy of the subjects? We have to relearn with Indigenous data how to actually re-identify in order to get all the relational connections documented and all the attribution there, which is their priority. And then trust in institutions, we kind of have enjoyed that a lot in libraries, but in this orientation, we really have to rebuild trust with the communities we're working with. So I'm going to stop there, pass on to Sandy, and thank you again.
Right. Thank you, Carol. So in track 2, we're looking at established collections. So we're thinking about all of the research that has already been deposited into these collections. And we have a really great example here at the University of Washington with the Jacobs Research Fund, where they have funded since 1975 grants to linguistic and anthropological researchers and Native North and South America. So primarily the research is in the Pacific Northwest. They have granted over 700 researchers funding, and one of the stipulations is that they deposit their data into the special collections here at the University of Washington. So it becomes a really great case of research that is being handled by an institution, and it's a legacy of information and just a treasure trove of knowledge, linguistic material that can be really potentially beneficial for Native communities, especially people who are working on language revitalization, rethinking cultural and relational accountability in their work. So what we're doing is thinking about and accountability and adherence to care to be balanced between these researchers and these collecting institutions that are holding these collections, realizing that it's a legacy, right? There's a lot of issues, there's a lot of things that we need to think about as far as how was the research conducted, who was the researcher, what kind of data did they deposit, and then how does that get translated into the finding aids and to the ways that we can access that material, and perhaps maybe some of that may be digitized, right? So should that have been digitized, or how much consultation has happened? We're not finding a lot of that. Those examples, mostly what we're looking at in this collection is a lot of finding aids and examining that metadata and how things are described. So our question is, how can tribes and community members gain ready access to materials about their own languages, about their own cultures that are held in these university collections? A lot of times, as Carol mentioned, the importance of naming people, speakers, grandmothers, elders, and also being more specific about regional places, dialects, things that are really important for these communities to be able to reclaim some of this knowledge. And of course, our thinking behind all of this is that relational accountability. So how can we integrate that responsibility for maintaining the well-being of our world, of the stories, of the materials of our ancestors, and preparing this for future generations. So as we're doing a lot of, sorry, maybe I need to also tell you, we've also doing some connecting with community members. Besides looking at the finding aids, we're getting ready to do some interviews with language teachers in Oregon who have some really, stakes in these collections, and talking to them about, getting some feedback on that metadata, on how things are described. We're looking for some exemplars and also some gaps. And in the end, we're hoping to kind of harmonize or marry, the information that from track one, looking at the contemporary scholars, which, is very, the benefit of that is that you have the researcher in the room, you have the people in the room to ask these questions, whereas these older collections, you don't have necessarily, the researcher or the community members in that space to ask those questions. So we're using these interviews with scholars or with language speakers, language teachers to help us to try to fill in those gaps of, what are some things that we should be aware of when we're thinking about publishing this type of information. So some quick takeaways, that need to identify people and speakers. A lot of times, these are just attributed to the researcher, right? So, sometimes they may not have, the specific names of people. That's probably one of the bigger takeaways right now. Once we start talking to the community members, I think we're going to start to see some nuances of, what is it that people really need from these finding aids and from the metadata. This will take a lot of time. This is going to take a lot of resources, lots of conversations, and a lot of relationship building, because there is a lack of trust in some of these communities of that these institutions have this material, and why isn't it in their own communities, or why haven't they, do they know about it even? So there's going to be a lot of some relationship building. So to close out, thinking about, working with Indigenous materials and Indigenous data, just some questions to think about is, how does the community benefit from the publication of that data or that material? I think a lot of times we prioritize the benefit of the institution or, the community at large, but I think, flipping that and thinking first about the community where it comes from should be paramount. What does openness mean for Indigenous scholarship? So does everything need to be published? From some communities, no, or, there may be some other types of restrictions that we need to be thinking about. And what would it look like if Indigenous priorities were the default? What if that was, where we started from, that expected ethical standard for data and for publishing? I know it kind of flips things on its head, and I welcome conversations about it, just to start thinking about another way of dealing with the data and materials in our collections. Thank you.
Well, I'm really grateful to have this opportunity to present with colleagues that I admire, and I'm also grateful for each of you and the work you're doing. So I'm going to just talk as fast as I can, and I'm going to apologize now. So You will see why, the title is what it is, Saviors and Silences. And also too, I always want to say that whenever I'm asked to present, I always, say this is an opportunity to get something off my chest. So that's there too. And I think that you'll see some themes and some continuities from Melanie to Carol and Sandy, here. And of course, right away, I want to just think about this idea of stewardship. And that being really deeply embedded in the work that that many of you are doing, that I've had a chance to hear. And I'm going to talk about the imperative of stewardship. That's going to be sort of a subtopic. But Wallace Stevens, someone who I have always enjoyed reading, said the word is the making of the world. And one thing that I wanted to sort of look at is to think about all of these signs and signifiers, and think about textualities, and also to the ways in which they are embedded in our media. And so when I think about Moms for Liberty, and I always want to say Moms Against Liberty, because it just seems like that's actually what they stand for. I want us to think about the ways in which, almost like a Trojan horse, the weaponization of motherhood, particularly a racialized motherhood, has been used to create, really unprecedented educational censorship and epistemic silence. And I think that if you look over to the right, you will see an article, just many of the articles that talked about what was happening in Houston pretty simultaneously, with the rise of, almost synergistically, if you will, the rise of Mothers Against Liberty, in that and we know what was happening in Texas and Florida and Louisiana and other places, and just began to spread in terms of state-mandated censorship. But also thinking about the fact that right away a new superintendent in the school decided, in this mostly Black and brown school district, that we will just save ourselves a step, and we will turn our libraries into in-school detention centers. And also one of the things that they were also able to get in command was money from the Department of Justice too. So I want to think about this idea of saviors, these pretend saviors, and when we think about many groups like Moms for Liberty, and also to think about epistemic silences. So we're living in an era when, what I think the whole sort of frontispiece of Moms for Liberty and other organizations like that were able to do was to not just sort of demand a kind of perimetization of curricula, but even of words. And this is from the New York Times. It was just a list of all the words that we cannot say, all the words that cannot be embedded in our K through 12 curricula, and then eventually in higher education. And what's worrying me so bad is that if you look at Birth of a Nation, how many people know what I'm talking about when I talk about Birth of a Nation? So it's considered to be, Roger Ebert said, it is the best, worst film. Right? Because it really had so many, introduced so many innovations, like the lingering close-up and the pull away in terms of cinematography, but also what Griffiths was able to do there was to create this anti-Reconstruction film that really justified why, it really upheld this notion of white supremacy and the savagery of formerly enslaved people. But when I looked at, in school, when I studied the film and looked at the film, one of the things, already a junior librarian maybe in my mind, I was like, books are everywhere in this film. Books are just everywhere in the film. And these are just some stills. So on the left, you have almost like the buffoonery of this Senate Senate now that has Black people in it. And even though Black people and the Black code laws are denied the most punishable offense, is being found reading or with reading material for a Black person. The most punishable offense for a white person was teaching a Black person to read or providing them with reading materials. So here, you can't really see it as well, but there's, some people in blackface, some actual African-American characters, and, they have these books, and the books almost look like they've, worse for wear, and then you look on the right side and you see so much of the action in Birth of a Nation is taking place in either civic libraries, if you will, or citizens libraries, or large private libraries, or in home libraries. So I'm just going to let you rest with that image. But if you go back and you look at that film, I want you to kind of think about the presence of books and literature and how, in a lot of ways, I think it is a precursor for where we are today. Censorship is at an all-time high. I remember back when I worked at the American Library Association, like the first year of my working in a leadership role there, I remember thinking, I said before our council, that I never thought I would see in my career a time when there would be 4 states that would have state-mandated censorship laws. And by the time it was over, by the time I stepped down from that position, 46 out of 50 states had state-mandated. So either it had been presented, it had been passed, or it was pending. And so I just, and we see that continuing to happen, just exponential rise. And here are just some headlines, just headlines, censorship's macro and micro level impacts. And the issue for me is that, and this is why it's different than the McCarthy era, because in the McCarthy era, that was, the House committee, and that was, McCarthy and his vendetta, and the fact that he was left unchecked in a lot of ways. But that we now see a normalization of censorship to the point that we've already discussed, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more. And I think that is going to have a long-term impact on academic curricula, and we already see the disappearance of certain departments, and scholarly publishing, and that's why being here is so important. I also, in my research on censorship, and also something I'm also interested in very much throughout my career, is adult literacy. I look at the maps, if we overlay them, between, I think there's a correlation between low literacy and high censorship reasons. I think there's a reason, why, like I live in Alabama, there is a low level of literacy across races in Alabama, and there is really high censorship in Alabama, seizing of our state archive and other types of things. But just think about it. This is kind of like a think image, if you will. Something that I think a lot about, and I want to kind of situate when we talk about censorship, and I want to say, because a lot of times back in the day when I'd be interviewed, and even now when I'd be interviewed about why is censorship rising, I would always say there's a continuum. So I've created this scale of information disorders that remember when disinformation was the good old days, right? That's what I always say. That was the good old days, but then we also have, and a longer, if I was speaking for a longer period of time, I would go through each of these. But information poverty, people just don't have information. Information disparity, you live in a great neighborhood, you get all the information. You live in a bad neighborhood, all your stuff is like proprietary or is misleading information. Information segregation and redlining, that follows that trend in a way. Information exclusion, you don't get access to information at all. Information withdrawal, there's information there, but some policy or the state is going to pull it back. And then information warfare, which we see all too frequently when we see our information infrastructure taken down during elections or during periods of time, and that's something that I follow too, and it happens on the national level. But what I want to say here is that censorship operates not only through removal, but through anticipatory silence. And this is one thing that I want to kind of think about and leave with you. Faculty, students, and institutions avoiding topics because of perceived risk. And it is that anticipatory silence that I think is going to hover over us like a cloud or come back again and again like El Nino. I think that anticipatory silence is really one of the things that is going to, if we is going to, if not a dark age, it will submerge us for a very long time into a gray age. Censorship has a chilling effect on emerging writers and scholars, and this is something that I think a lot about. You can just see this. Reduce invitations to educational and public speaking engagements, reduce readership, reputational harm, future publishing opportunities, self-censorship, employment, livelihood impacted, critical and timely ideas that are left unsurfaced. I can't say that. It's a career killer. And what that does is that it leaves unsafe and unsound theories or practices left unchecked. How many times, even in the public square that we have today, is online. People who have nothing to risk, they have all the language. Those of us who have something to lose, we have no language. We don't want to put ourselves out there. And so even though ideas might be unpopular, they are or unsafe or unsound, they're left unchecked because people are afraid to speak. And, this is just looking at what's happening at our universities. I'm looking at this when I think about like Texas faculty exodus. Professors are fleeing public universities over book censorship. And here's a quote: nearly every public university system now mandates some type of syllabus review, screening for prohibitive content, including references to gender identity or sexual orientation or race or social justice. And again, what will be the long-term impact? Educational gag orders, and I wanted to bring this here because I wanted to talk about these bills and break them down. And I remember back when I was at ALA, people would say, my ACRL friends in academic college and research libraries, they'd say, well, we don't have much to worry about because, we believe in the marketplace of ideas. And I would always say, what doesn't come in the front door is going to come in the back door, right? Because I grew up in the hood, so that's real. Okay. And y'all didn't, I can honestly say. But it's okay. What I'm saying is what doesn't get you going is going to get you coming, right? But in terms of colleges and universities, I just want you to see the educational gag orders and the bills that have been introduced. So again, we know who censorship targets, right? All of these groups. And we also know that many of the studies, there's one by University of Pennsylvania, that authors of color were approximately 4.5 times more likely to have books banned than white authors. And then also, too, to not have second books published. And I've been seeing a lot of that, books that have been challenged. We used to think, oh, if your book is banned, it's going to just, everybody's going to buy it. But the reality is that it has a longer term chilling effect, and it could be a career killer today. So where does that leave us? I want us to think about library publishing as scholarly advocacy and due diligence. And this is an organization I work for now. It is the Historically Black Colleges and Universities Library Alliance. It was formed in 2002 when a group of librarians from HBCU said nobody is paying attention to the issues that we're facing on our campus, the libraries that we're running with just a fraction of the resources at PWIs, and yet we're up against so much. And today, so much, and you already know, so much of the anti-DEI backlash has fallen at the feet of HBCUs. Here's a couple of things I talked about yesterday. There's some really important studies. Melanie talked about some, but here's one: Race in the Measurement of Publication Productivity. Uses sociology as a case study, but it talks about the disparities in publishing and also, too, the need for methodological orientation that libraries could play a part in helping scholars who are likely to be underpublished to navigate that. And then the publishing tax that HBCU faculty pay. At HBCUs, what we see is that HBCU, a scholar who moves from a PWI, primarily white institution, to an HBCU falls into a publishing abyss. And if they move the other way, their opportunities soar. Why is that? And that's one of the reasons why we are looking at the possibility of library publishing as a consortia. And as I close, I just wanted to bring up a couple of areas that I think are important. One is teaching and learning. What is a role that libraries can play, academic libraries can play, in supporting scholars in finding out what they can teach, what they can present in a way that, where it's not just a perception or fear that leads. And I think that's something that isn't happening as much as it should. Library publishing initiatives that cultivate and disseminate original and timely scholarship by faculty, students, and community members. And here's one. This is the great Georgette Norman from Montgomery, Alabama. She was, there's a small press, Black Belt Press, which is an offspring of a university press in the South. And a book, she's 80, and her first book was published. And it was standing room only at the reading in Montgomery at the New South bookstore. And finally, there's so many convenings. Yari Yari, which is legendary, happened in 1997. I happened to be there. And you had all these great people. Lucille Clifton was still alive. Nawal Saadawi from Egypt, and our colleague is here, the great Nawal Saadawi, Flora Nwapa. It was like diasporic, it was continental, and there is so little written about it. And New York University missed a chance. If it had been today, they could have published those proceedings in a powerful way. So library publishing is advocacy, is a future frontier for the HBCU Library Alliance. I think that you all are already doing that work. We know that digital space has proven to be a space where Black ideas and thoughts and scholars congregate, so it makes so much sense to look at digital publishing. But I just want to thank you again for what I've learned from you and for the opportunity to present in like 2.5 time if you press your screen and you're watching a video. So thank you very much.
Oh, maybe? Yes. Okay, great. Thank you again. That was amazing. We do have time for questions. I can kick us off if folks need. Oh, wait, no, I see a hand.
Okay, so Hall, I saw Hall cited on the slide, so I'm assuming that's you, TD Hall on your own slide. So for that one, I was wondering for all the information things, have you thought about adding information literacy to that? Because I see that becoming every day more and more a form of censorship. So not teaching those skills, providing those skills in the K through 12. I mean, just we heard 2 years ago, so the students coming in have a 15-minute reading time. We're hearing now this year a 5-minute attention span for reading. This is a critical issue. This is a way that their censorship is happening without, because it affects all of those things that you had on there. Because if you don't even know how to read, I mean, like that's a huge first step. And I think we're missing that step that is attacking us in this library publishing world, thinking about that, like just that ability alone, like our students coming in that we're trying to encourage to be editors of these journals and they can't even read for 5 minutes. Wow,
Yeah, and that's a disorder.
Not a question, sorry.
Yeah, that's disorders. So information literacy is, and I write so much about information literacy and all of those things, but this is a list of disorders. So I'm listening to what you're saying and thinking about, is it information low literacy? Is it information, so thinking about the things that we're dealing with in a negative way. But information literacy, John Lewis said before he died and dropped the mic that he felt that information access and information literacy would be the civil rights issue of the 21st century. He said that in an amazing, very prescient, clear thinking interview that I think is understudied. But I absolutely agree.
Hi, big time fan. Hi, Dr. Littletree. I was in your class for several quarters. Good to see you. I did have a question, and all panelists can answer, but it was specifically about the Indigenous section, which is just how do you think that work interfaces with like the open source initiatives that we've been talking a lot about? I know you touched on it, but that was my question.
So can you hear this? Can you hear me? Okay. I can't hear it at all up here, so it's kind of odd. So thank you. So your question is about open scholarship, is that, and how Indigenous knowledge should be intersecting with that? I think, thinking about Tracy's comments about, we want Indigenous knowledge and we want Indigenous presence in these spaces, but we also want to be a little bit careful about, if there is some things that shouldn't have been published in the past. I think that's, kind of going back, thinking about the, research protocols and, that salvage anthropology where, there was this the mad collection of Indigenous materials without consent, right? So we're dealing with that stuff, but also, thinking about going forward, like how do we do better? How do we think about, creating these spaces where we can have better infrastructure or better communication, better documentation of, the relationships and the relationality that's embedded within a lot of this Indigenous research. Indigenous, decolonizing methodologies and, thinking about research from that other perspective is relatively new, right, to the field. And so, but I think a lot of people are embracing that now. And so how do we incorporate that into these infrastructures in a way that is maintainable and, people can stay on board and, that we can have guidelines that are really specific to help people to navigate that.
Thanks, Sandy. I'll just follow on to that. I think what our cases have been really fascinating in this respect, because the one case of the ecological Cherokee knowledge, it ends up it's going to be completely open. We went into it thinking it would be a really highly restricted collection, but it is because the author worked so closely with the Indigenous family and did everything, by their the intent of the community and what they needed and wanted to be released. That's what it was all about. And so we end up with this fabulous collection that's going to actually be open. We have other collections, though, that we think will be completely restricted. And then the metadata becomes all there is, right? So it's even more important maybe to, make sure you've got enough description to really, make it have its own life and shows where the Indigenous knowledge is really existing. So I think it's going to be really interesting to watch how it plays out, and it's going to take a lot of expertise on our side to really, do the best we can under the, open expectations.
Hi, thank you all for your efforts and your speaking this morning. I appreciate especially the efforts to explore collections as data and the data in our collections. But this question is more about practice. Library publishing in the past has slipped under the radar, and I think that's been a strength that we've relied on in order to do advocacy and due diligence. That's getting curtailed now, both as we mature as a discipline and as outside externalities are pressing down on us through our institutions. And so what does advocacy look like sort of outside of standing up and risking our careers for our values, which is something that libraries have had we've had backing from our professional organizations, but maybe not so much now. So what creative steps might we think of to partner or to slip the bounds again, the way we were able to do 10 years ago, because we were relatively low flying? Are there thoughts about ways that we can, you don't have to solve this for us, but I'm posing the question to the room. Are there ways that we can slip the bounds again so that we can affect this advocacy for our values, even under the immense pressures that we're under? Or does it merely mean that we are the vanguard of a revolution that stands up and begins to put our bodies on the wheel?
Yeah, I mean, I always think that, at some point, if it comes down to revolution, you have to choose what side you're on, but I think that before you get there, one of the reasons why I chose to talk about Black Belt Press and Georgette Norman's work is because, I've seen where institutions and universities and, in this case, like a press helped to create a community press. And I think that that is so important. And in fact, I think that that goes back to what, the foundational ideas of what universities were at one point, right? Which is to build community infrastructure, because a lot of times it was expected that the people who were being educated would go back and contribute, to community. And I definitely see that. So that's one thing that, right there sort of at the very end, and I probably didn't touch on it, one thing that I was saying as a recommendation is to what degree can library publishing actually help to build or start a parallel efforts in community, and I think that that would serve everyone, really well.
Could I ask a quick follow-up question? Do you mean that like it's becoming more difficult to publish certain titles or to like openly express certain values?
I think it is. I think we're visible in ways that we weren't visible before, and anyone you can see, you can slap down. And so, so now we have to get creative, I think, in the ways that we affect advocacy in the service of, anti-racist practice or anti-oppressive practice through library publishing. Yeah, that's the clarification.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I was really glad to hear Tracy's remarks about censorship, because that's something I wanted to bring up but didn't really have time. At the end of conducting our study last year, it was sort of after Trump's inauguration, and people were much less willing to talk to us about diversity audits. It seems like the landscape is really changing, actually. And I think that's really important to engage with. And so I think this is a challenging issue that we are all dealing with in different ways. I mean, I just think about even, in our department, thinking about how we can continue applying for grants, doing the diversity-oriented work that we want to do when these federal funding bodies are looking for keywords and going to reject certain grants. So I think there's been a big conversation about, can we do this work but under a different name? Which I think, like sort of learning from the past, how have people done this work sort of covertly? I've talked to people at other institutions in the South who used to be, in charge of the DEI, division, and now it's not called DEI anymore, but they're continuing to try to do the work. So I don't think that's very helpful, but I do think, trying to learn from other institutions that are in a similar place about the strategies that they're using can be useful. But I do think it's interesting in relationship to like open data, because maybe we can't be as open about some things, or maybe, if we do a diversity audit, we're not going to be publishing it on the web or something like that, because it can be used in ways that we might not expect. But I think it's a great question.
That's all we've got time for.
I just want to thank you for bringing it up, quite frankly, because I think flying under the radar is kind of a superpower that we've always had. And I've always told students, you just can get in there, infiltrate, and make things happen, because no one's paying attention. They respect you because you're a librarian, but you can have a lot of influence if you just have a lot of rigor and work hard and infiltrate. But yeah, now everybody's watching, and we have a certain profile that that's more prominent.
Yeah, and I just, I'll be remiss because I want my grandma and granddaddy to visit my dreams.
One thing is that some people have the privilege of flying under the radar. Others don't. That's why Black women are. If something's going to change, the person who brought the suit to remove Trump's name from the Kennedy Center was a Black woman. And so, for those of you who can fly under the radar and actually do good work, and work that changes things, okay. But for those of you who are going to be complicit with your silence and make it seem like everything's okay, that's a problem. And for some of us who can't fly under the radar, I have no recourse. I have no alternative. I have to live in this body. This is the body that was given to me. I have to say these words, not because I'm radical, but because I have a family that migrated from oppressive part of Louisiana where my grandfather was fearing for his life. And we came to LA as to escape violence. You know, that's the history of my family and our origin story. And I'm not saying this to kind of like preach or anything. I'm saying because there's a good thing that we all have our different histories, because it means that we move differently. But I do want to say that when I think of when great social change has happened, it is when everybody came to the front lines. When the person who was the most privileged and the person who was the least privileged said, I can't take it anymore, and that other person said that too. So at some point, we are dealing with a kind of a repression that is affecting what we're allowed to think. And I just want to let that settle, because I don't know if, I think there are a lot of strategies. I'll just say that.
Thank you so much, everyone. This was a fantastic panel. We've got a break, and then coming back here, there will be our watch party for some of the remote participants, and things happening in the other rooms. So thank you, everyone.
Yay! We got to take a photograph.
Yes, and 2 other sessions in the other 2 rooms.